looking forward very much to the talk and discussion.
Okay, thank you. So, as president of the European Academy of Science, I'm very pleased to introduce to you Professor Mariette de Christine, that will speak about the social impacts that we are suffering, and we should support for the development and the welfare and comfort of the people. I think this is a great idea. I could just hear that Professor Mariette, she is from, you can take from his name, she is from European origin. She is from Italy. And when I remember Italy and I remember America, I go 200 years ago, and I cannot, I just forget Sacco and Vanzetti that went to USA, and they try to be the drivers of changes of the labor work. And I cannot forget the place where they stay in the north of New York, and they built something else. This is what, in my opinion, Europe was good, is that we are really bridging, and we bridge the world from our ancestral times, whatever the region from Europe we come. And is also we still have the hope that the social impacts will drive our future, will make us more conscious what we have to do in favor and in the name of the people. Saying so, I give the floor to Professor Ahmad to introduce our speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Martin. Thank you, Professor de Christina, for accepting our invitation. So good afternoon and good morning, dear colleagues, in which time zone are, dear colleagues, members of the Presidium, researchers, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, today I'm delighted to welcome you to the European Academy of Science seminar. It is our opportunity to engage with the global leader in science and society. This webinar is being recorded and will be live on YouTube and will be available on our YouTube channel. My name is Shahzada. I'm a professor of material science at the European Academy of Science. And I'm joined by next 1 hour by Professor Mariette de Christina. She studied, Professor de Christina studied journalism at Boston University and graduated in 1986. She is the current dean of the College of Communication and professor of journalism at Boston University since 2019. She is an internationally recognized science journalist, and prior to this, from 2009 to 19, she was the 8th editor-in-chief of the Scientific American and executive vice president of the Springer Nature. She is the first woman to head Scientific American since its founding in 1985. In the past, de Christina also served as the president of National Association for Science Writer and executive editor of Popular Science. In 2016, Boston University recognized her work as a Distinguished Alumni Award. Beyond her role as a dean, Christina chairs the steering group for the top 10 emerging technologies for the World Economic Forum, where I met her on many occasions, and is an elected fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Sciences. She is the committee chair of Climate Crossroad and Advancing Science Communication for the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, Engineering and Medicine. She is also an advocate for sustained government funding for basic scientific research and made a positive argument with the U.S. Senate committee. She brings high standards, new approaches to going through a change, and a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Today, Professor de Christina will share her vision about science journalism and will talk about why science communication is not effort and the power of civic sciences. It is in line with our academy mission, or EU mission, creating an impact of science, and we have to double down our approach. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation, to members who are for the engagement on YouTube and Zoom. And with this, I think I will pass the floor to Professor de Christina, and looking forward to listen to your views on science communication.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Professor Ahmed and President Martins. It is indeed a great honor for me to be able to meet with all of you and the European Academy of Science. I'm very grateful for this invitation, and I just wanted to express that gratitude to you before I begin and say that one of the things I really treasure and admire about science is how it brings the world together and how scientists have indeed shown the way to collaboration. And I'm really grateful and appreciate the invitation today. I'm going to share some slides with my remarks for about a half an hour, and then would be really delighted to take your questions. So let me just press the button to share my slides. Thank you very much. All right. Can you see this all right? Thank you so much. So hello again. As you just learned, I'm Dean of Boston University's College of Communication and really grateful to meet all of you today. My talk today, as you've heard, is called Science Communication is Not Enough, the Power of Civic Science. And the image on this slide is a manhole cover that's actually right next to my building, the College of Communication at Boston University. And I just thought it was a nice theme for the beginning of my talk. I like it that it says communication. I read a letter on the Academy's website by President Martens about the mission of the European Academy of Science, and his letter inspired me. I wanted to read just a quote from that letter to you. It says, quote, "We aspire to be influential players in shaping science policy, not only in Europe, but also on a global scale. Our efforts will ensure that the voice of the scientific community is heard and that our impact resonates worldwide," end quote. That is such a worthy goal when we are all living in a world with new advances that raise questions such as gene editing and AI and brain organoids and many, many more. These require broad public discussion and democratic systems for them to work. And I really appreciate this statement and hope our discussion is some help toward that great end. And at its heart, I know that science communication helps with that goal. I'm excited to talk about that with you today and how to make it more impactful. When we speak of civic science, we mean to embrace bidirectional or two-way communication and civic engagement. I'm going to tell that a little bit more about that to you in a minute. So you just heard a bit about my bio, but one of the things that builds trust when people are communicating is to get to know them just a little bit better and more personally. I want to be clear and say, first of all, as you've heard, I come to this talk as a science communication practitioner rather than a researcher. My passion has always been learning about science and then sharing that learning with others. I get a lot of joy out of that, and I'm truly grateful to all of the scholars for the important insights from their research, and that I will share a bit of with you today. Before I was dean, as you just learned, I was a science journalist for more than 30 years. Part of that time at Popular Science, and then 20 years at Scientific American, the last 10 of which I was where I was editor-in-chief. And yes, you heard I have the first woman editor-in-chief since Scientific American was started in 1845, but there was a woman after me already. That's nice, and another man too, which is great. But as editor-in-chief, one of the things I loved is I worked closely with colleagues at local language editions in 14 countries, including Germany, Spain, Italy, France, Belgium, Czech Republic, Russia, and many more. I really enjoyed that collaboration. And then at left, you're seeing a photo of me from when I was at Scientific American. I'm walking with Nobel Prize winner Ben Feringa after interviewing him on stage at the World Economic Forum meetings in Davos. I had asked him what he was most excited about in his lab research right now, and he was so thrilled to talk about his lab's progress in developing molecular switches that I asked him to please say it again, this time so I could record it for a Scientific American podcast. The forum staff found that really charming and amusing, so they snapped this photo. In the picture above right, you see 5 people. From left to right, they're my daughter Mallory's boyfriend Evan, Mallory, me, my husband, and oldest child, Sel. And below that is a photo of me with colleague faculty from the college at the university's matriculation. We're about to welcome the incoming class. I'm in the middle in red. So this is an example of how to make it a little personal when you're starting to communicate somebody, which builds trust. Before I talk about science communication and civic science, I want to share a few basics about why scientists, what we know about why scientists want to communicate their work in the first place. The public understanding of science as a field began around the 1980s. Lots of research since then has found that scientists have several goals for communicating about their research. And what I'm sharing now is from a 2017 consensus paper from the U.S. National Academies of Sciences which outlines several broad goals. You can see that the report title at the right in case you want to read more. The report offered 5 general reasons why scientists might like to communicate. First, they often want to share findings and excitement of science, kind of like what's happening in the image on this slide. They want to increase appreciation for the use of science as a tool to solve social challenges that we're all facing as a global society. They want to increase knowledge of a specific issue to improve a decision about that issue. They might like to influence people's opinions, behavior, and policy preferences to improve a decision about an issue. And they might want to engage with diverse groups so that their perspectives can help inform the solutions to societal challenges. But these goals aren't always achieved as well as planned. Let's talk about some of the reasons that science communication doesn't always succeed as well as it could. For a long time, science communication operated on a principle called the deficit model. According to the deficit model, if I explain something to you well, you will instantly understand and appreciate its value. And I know many of us feel that this idea makes intuitive sense. I know I do. It seems like the best way to improve science communication is simply to make that information clear and to tell a great story in an entertaining way. That's very important, but it isn't always enough to get somebody to appreciate the value of your science and to use that scientific information to make decisions. Research has actually shown that the deficit model of science communication is wrong. There are a number of reasons for that. As the National Academy's report that I just mentioned to you put it, quote, people rarely make decisions based only on scientific information. They typically also take into account their own goals and needs, knowledge and skills, and values and beliefs. In other words, every individual has different filters for the information that scientists are trying to communicate to them. I like this image because it looks like the man is trying very hard to be specific and accurate in his figures, but she doesn't necessarily look convinced. Why does that happen? Well, there are several reasons why the message of science communications aren't perfectly received. And I will talk to you about that and also how to get around it. I like this image because one person is sharing a picture with a lot of detail, rich detail, and the other is just grasping a piece of that picture. One challenge is that the information is mediated by various platforms and sources. The way people interpret the information coming from various sources is affected by factors such as their trust in science, their existing knowledge of the science, and their personal beliefs. People do not make decisions based solely on scientific information, as we've learned, but take values and other considerations into account. Individuals also have specific preferences, different preferences. A message about scientific information that's well crafted for one audience does not necessarily meet the needs of other audiences. You may need an array of types of messages on different platforms to reach more members of any given audience. For all these reasons, science communication is affected by the context, and understanding that context requires two-way conversation and engagement with different audiences in different places in different times, taking into account what they want to know, what they already know, understand, and believe. It's also really important that the audience trusts the science communicator, because you're not going to listen to somebody you don't trust. A lot of factors can influence that trust. Let's look at some of the information about trust and how it varies. The good news is that studies generally show that scientists are highly regarded and that most people trust researchers to do what is right. At left is an informational graphic from the Pew Research Center that shows most people in the countries listed have a combination of, quote, a lot and, quote, some trust in scientists to do what is right. Although you can see there are variations among the countries, high trust in science in general is a global phenomenon. In fact, you can see that it's really relatively rare that respondents say that they have, quote, not too much trust or none at all in scientists. Unfortunately, however, that trust in science, as well as in government and other institutions, has been falling in recent years. You can see that in the graphic at the right from the GlobeScan survey. It's great to see that trust in science and academic institutions is still higher than others, but it is falling. This may be especially relevant given my own country of origin. Now, we see signs that science has become increasingly politicized in a number of nations around the globe, which raises additional concerns about what information is trusted, when it is trusted, and who is a trusted messenger. In this graphic by Statista based on Pew Research Center data, you can see the effects of an audience's political leanings on their trust in scientists. Again, we see variations in the countries represented here, but it's clear that the political lens is another factor in influencing the amount of trust that is given for science communication. In another factor in recent years, there have been many changes in our communication ecosystems, which I want to touch on briefly. A combination of changing business models and freely available access to information on the internet, whether that information is true or not, by the way, has resulted in a loss of multiple legacy media outlets that used to provide authoritative, fact-checked information about science. The figures I'm showing here apply to the US, but the loss is felt in many places. Scientific American itself, by the way, was recently sold, and many of its editors lost their jobs. That's quite new, just a couple of weeks ago. Alongside the drop in legacy media outlets, increasingly people are turning to social media for their information. Why? People like to follow individuals whom they feel they know personally and feel they can trust. I know we're all aware of the challenges of social media, where we have seen a rise in misinformation and polarization accelerated by generative AI. There are many factors, but we know that algorithms provide irresistible content tailored to user interests based on browsing patterns. It's clear then that we need the voices of scientists more than ever to share accurate information to counter some of the downsides of our current media ecosystem. But given this context, what can make our scientists and science communicators more successful at sharing information and having an impact? Oh, one last chart for me for now. Could the public turn to scientists only as a way to counter some of the flaws in our information ecosystem? This graph from the Pew Research Center shows that while people admire and respect scientists for a lot of reasons, including their intelligence, their skills at working in teams, their focus on solving real-world problems, and their honesty, they're not viewed as great communicators, at least not in the US. What are we to do about this? The good news is that we have many promising efforts to build trust and connections for scientists who want to engage the public more productively. I'm going to tell you about one of the ones that I'm currently involved in, called civic science, but there are others, and they're known by other names, including participatory science. In the US, at least, a key part of this story started in 1996. That was the year at the 25th General Assembly of the International Council of Scientific Unions, now known as the International Science Council. National Science Foundation Director Neil Lane delivered an address introducing and defining his highly influential concept called civic scientist. Quote, in this capacity, scientists step beyond their campuses and into the center of their communities to engage in active dialogue. Neil Lane had 3 goals for civic scientists. He wanted them to be involved in public engagement. He argued that scientists must actively communicate the value of research directly to the public. He wanted them to participate in policy involvement. He urged researchers to bridge the gap between academic science and federal policy formulation. And he wanted them to earn public support in an ongoing way. He cautioned that public funding for science was not just a blank check that you could always get and spend as you will, but it requires sustained public understanding to continue. I'm grateful to Professor Peter Levine at Tufts University for this depiction of the intersection points in civic science among science, civic activities, and a successful democracy. Professor Levine is a member of the Practice and Science of Civic Science Advisory Committee, which, by the way, I'm also a member of. Civic science seeks to foster a culture where everybody can help shape and benefit from science by bringing together all stakeholders with diverse values and interests for a dialogue. Civic science accomplishes this by creating an inclusive science communication environment that advances public problem solving. Okay, that sounds good, Mariette, but what does it look like? Let me give you a few stories to tell you some examples. First, let's meet Kevin Esvelt. He's an associate professor at the MIT Media Lab in Cambridge, Massachusetts, actually right across the river from where I am now in Boston. The first time I heard his name, I was still editor-in-chief at Scientific American. It was 2016, so 10 years ago, and I was attending a meeting called Sci-Fu on the Mountain View, California campus of Google. Several people said to me, "You just have to talk to Kevin Esvelt. He's so interesting." And I learned he'd given a talk that year called Better Than Nature, The Ethics of Ecological Engineering. Now, I'd heard about CRISPR technology for gene editing and also about gene drives, the idea that we could alter the genetic code of an entire species. So I sought out Kevin, and when we met, he spoke to me about his work. He was excited about his research, but what really got my attention was that he was always also very concerned about the proper application of that research. He said something like, with this kind of power, scientists should not be alone in making decisions about this technology's use. Everybody should have a say. He told me about a project that he wanted to do on an island called Nantucket, just off the coast of Massachusetts. It has one of the highest incidences of Lyme disease in the US. Nantucket is number 3 in the nation, in fact, with something like 15% of all residents afflicted with Lyme disease. The island's high tick population is what is what transmits the Lyme disease through the bites of the ticks. And that population benefits from abundant white-footed mice, shrews, and deer. The black-legged deer tick carries the disease and lives on those different creatures at different stages of its life cycle. The ticks themselves are really tiny, about the size of a poppy seed, and so they're hard to see if they get on you. Kevin had an idea to help stop Lyme disease. He told me that researchers could use gene editing technology on the white-footed mice to prevent them from passing Lyme disease to the ticks. The mice would have genetically encoded antibodies to kill Lyme bacteria. Because of the power of the technology, Kevin said the researchers would offer this idea to Nantucket residents, but they would only pursue it if the community wanted them to do so. They would not do it if people didn't want it. And then it hit me. This was what was missing from a lot of from successful science communication, engagement and dialogue with members of the community whom the science was meant to serve. That was 2016. At the right, you can see a headline from the Boston Globe in 2022, and a story covering the project Kevin Esvelt was talking about, named Mice Against Ticks. The plan was to genetically engineer thousands of mice and release them on Nantucket. One thing I think is clear is that proper community engagement, you can see, can take some time. The project is now running strong in Nantucket and another nearby island called Martha's Vineyard. Mice Against Ticks aims to be a model for using biotechnology responsibly for the public good. As the website says, quote, "This type of ecological engineering project can only occur with the guidance of people who live in the area, because we've developed technologies that can spread on their own. We're responsible for preventing accidental misuse." So that's one example. Let me tell you a couple of others. A few years after I met Kevin Esvelt, I learned that the idea of civic science had begun to become a movement in the US with a group of funders led by the Rita Allen Foundation. You can see a website page at the left. In full disclosure, I want to tell you that I am part of the Practice and Science of Civic Science Advisory Committee that I mentioned earlier, and also recently joined the Rita Allen Foundation Board. And for that reason, I also want to say here, if any of this is interesting to you at the end, I'd love to talk to you about how we can collaborate. The Rita Allen, in an 18-month program, the Civic Science Fellows that are selected, and now there have been 3 cohorts of them, about 20 to 24 each cohort. The fellows work with host partners such as universities and NGOs and others. And so let me share another example of civic science in action, this time with a civic science fellow. Meet Abby Jones. She's an epidemiologist. In 2024, she opened a nationwide map of the US about Chagas disease, a parasitic infection native to many Latin American countries. She planned to analyze US cases using data from electronic health records databases. She'd expected states with large Latin American immigration populations, where it's endemic, such as California, Texas, and Florida, to dominate the data. But what she found was a hotspot in Massachusetts, where I am, up in the Northeast. That made no sense. Chagas disease is transmitted primarily by triatomine insects, also known as kissing bugs, for their habit of biting near people's mouths. and they can quietly damage the heart over decades, which means early detection is really important. Chagas is endemic to Latin America and found in Central and South America, so the concentration of cases in Massachusetts just made no sense. Abby's breakthrough came through conversations with Boston clinicians. She learned that it wasn't that Massachusetts had more disease. They just had a health center in East Boston that was actually looking for Chagas. This revelation became central to her civic science fellowship at the Rockefeller University Center for Clinical and Translational Science and Clinical Directors Network. Electronic health records databases that track 250 million people were only showing 2,000 to 4,000 cases of Chagas in the US. The records weren't capturing medical reality, they were just mapping neglect and screening. In fact, the US Centers for Disease Control estimates there are probably nearly 300,000 people in the US that are infected. Now, as part of the Chagas disease translational team at Rockefeller and the Clinical Directors Network, Abby analyzes huge data sets and uses focus groups to gather stories from clinicians, patients, and community members. She's conducting these groups with medical providers and also with Spanish-speaking community members in New York City who meet screening criteria but have never been offered a test. She's trying to find out what would prompt them to take the test or deter them from being screened, and what changes we could make to make care more accessible. Here's something Abby said that I want to share with you. Listening to people has given me new perspective on community engagement and policy and helped me see how the practical everyday obstacles people face can be turned into research evidence, changes in clinical practice, and eventually policy change. Originally designed as an 18-month fellowship, Abby's project recently secured additional funding for another year through the Stavros Niarchos Foundation Institute for Global Infectious Disease Research at Rockefeller. So this reflects the importance of the work and the extended time that civic science can take. Let me just give you two more shorter examples. My own college has hosted 2 past civic science fellows, with a new one that I'm pleased to say will be coming soon. At the left is Michelle Amazine, who's an associate dean for research at my college. Michelle wanted to understand how best to help communities resist misinformation that they might see on social media. For her project, she focused on Boston's Black and Latino communities. Her conversations with community members revealed an issue deeper than just factual misunderstandings. Many participants rarely saw themselves reflected in mainstream science news, creating an information vacuum where misleading claims could thrive. Others told her about historical injustices that had eroded trust in scientific authorities for generations. Armed with fresh insights from the community, Michelle and her team set out to test a range of interventions to help communities resist misinformation. One of the most promising tools was something called pre-bunking, where people are warned about common misinformation tactics before they encounter them. It's kind of like a vaccine for the mind against misinformation. Participants exposed to pre-bunking messages were more likely to question dubious claims and less likely to share them with others. Michelle also learned about community-rooted communication. And I'm going to quote her here. People told us again and again, she said, that they wanted information from leaders who really understood their neighborhoods. Local politicians, pastors, librarians, librarians, and community advocates. Trust didn't come from a title or a platform, she learned. It came from shared experience and a genuine relationship. For her future studies, Michelle says we'll ask community partners what matters to them and then work together to respond, whether that's debunking medical myths, helping multilingual families navigate online health advice, or something we haven't even thought of yet. This shift is more about research than research methods. It's about moving beyond simply conducting studies for community to working with community members as equal partners, listening to their concerns and tapping into their expertise. Michelle says, civic science is about meeting people where they are. It's about building trust and resilience together, not prescribing solutions from afar. She gives this advice to anyone who would like to work with a community. Start locally and really listen. So much of our work comes down to building genuine, respectful relationships with communities. People want information that's immediate, relevant, and rooted in their lived experience, not handed down from outside experts. At the right, you can see another of my college's past civic science fellows, Amel Hussein, who created the first online graduate certificate in civic science communication at my college at Boston University. Rather than training scientists to simply explain their work better, the program shows them how to bridge the gap between research and communities by building genuine relationships and how to translate complex information into digestible knowledge that can reach diverse audiences. So I want to be clear here and say I'm not suggesting this type of engagement is for everyone. Not every researcher has the time, the interest, or the ability to engage in this way. But if you would like to learn more, if it's something that's appealing to you, I wanted to make a couple of other suggestions for you to explore. There are many helpful books out there about improving science communication and outreach. I'm pretty fond of this book called Strategic Science Communication by communication scholars John Beasley and Anthony Dudo. In the book, they offer a number of tips about how science communicators can improve their strategic communication. Before anything else, for instance, it's a good idea to think about the audience that you're targeting and their interests and their context. It's also a good idea to ask yourself, what do you want the audience to do with the information that you plan to share with them? The book offers chapters about how to take action to build trust when communicating, which I've listed here on the left. And as Michelle Amazine pointed out, I think one of the most important is being willing to genuinely listen and also to respect the experiences of others when you do so. At my college too, if you like, we have a free network for scientists who want to connect with each other and talk about their science communication efforts and support each other. I mean, one of the things I like, there are a lot of great training programs, a lot of great books, but it's not necessarily easy to find other colleagues who you can talk to when you're encountering challenges along the way. So that's one thing we hope to do with our network. And I've listed the URL at the bottom here, if anybody would like to explore this further. Last, let's back out the lens a little bit. So we're talking about individuals, but maybe there are some broader suggestions that the European Academy of Science might potentially consider and encourage in its mission to engage the public broadly with science. Earlier this month, this comment appeared in the journal Nature with some recommendations to increase trust. I've summarized them at the left, but I just want to touch on them very briefly. The ideas include involving the public with research because such research is more likely to be aligned with real-world policy priorities. And the comment gave an example of how the EU's Horizon 2020 was developed with citizen inputs. Another idea is making advisory bodies participatory. The commenter suggested the use of citizen panels, consensus conferences, online consultations, such as the one done by the Danish Board of Technology, now called Democracy X. Embracing diverse forms of knowledge, trust is built when people recognize that their expertise has been taken seriously. So recognizing that the public and scientists each bring their own knowledge and testing that knowledge through joint inquiry is a good idea. The commenters provided examples in the Philippines, Canada, New Zealand, Peru, and South Africa, where they're working to incorporate broader forms of knowledge into policy, particularly indigenous knowledge. I like this notion of being humble, honest, and transparent, and I hope you find I've made an effort toward those lines myself today. Transparency is vital in cases where policy making is urgent and tough choices need to be made quickly. The nonprofit organization Ciencia Puerto Rico is mentioned in the comment, showing how culturally grounded engagement can reach communities that top-down messaging really can't. And scaling up radically, the commenters suggest every research institution and policy organization should establish capabilities and incentives for supporting dialogues between the public, researchers, and policymakers. So this is the end of my formal remarks. I'm going to stop screen sharing, but I wanted to put my email up there in case we don't get to a question today or you think of something you want to ask me later. I feel like I've only touched on these really complicated topics. Thank you so much for your time and attention today. I'm truly grateful, and I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Christina. It's a great pleasure to listen to your views and how we can double down our approach on science communication, which I commented before is the need of the hour, and as the academy and also in the European Union are forcing it. So with this, I think the talk is open, the floor to take the question. We are willing to take the question. And the first is Professor Katharina from Germany.
Yeah, thank you very much for this inspiring talk. And I think this, figure of trust and transparency and so on, who would not share that? Let me say that your examples were very enticing because they are specific and they affect a certain community, and like the tick example, for example. Now, if we look at the more general questions, my background is in defossilization, climate change, things like that. And we are up against really, I would say, misinformation lobbies. So people listen to a lot of voices, and it's hard when you compete against your, let's say, best social media or so information as a scientist to even gain the audience in terms of talking with you. And so I wonder what your experience is there. And I would like to alert the audience also to a paper that recently came out by our German Wissenschaftsrat, the Science Council, on intellectual independence necessary for people to be able to communicate, because that means on both sides the mind should be open and see and transparent and listen to arguments and so on. So how about these bigger questions where a lot of networks are, let's say, against the science?
I want to thank you for these excellent questions. And also, if I may, it'd be wonderful if you could put a link to that paper in the chat. I just made a note to myself, but I want to make sure that I read that. Thank you.
Try to hope it's possibly in German, so you needed to translate.
That's all right. We have tools now, don't we?
Translator.
I'm grateful for your questions. One of the areas I've had the real privilege to work on a little bit, at least, from my practitioner, and I don't want to ever overstate my own expertise. I am a practitioner than a scholar. Is on climate communication, what used to be called the Climate Communication Initiative at the National Academies, and is now called Climate Crossroads. There are many, in fact, wonderful tools, and I would love to connect you both after this if you'd like. We do find that sometimes it's easier to begin locally in conversation where, as you pointed out, concreteness rather than abstractions. You're suffering droughts. Your farm isn't doing as well as it used to, or other challenges that are happening from climate change. We've even found sometimes that it helps to start with what people can see and experience without bringing in the broader issues immediately. One of the things I think is admirable that the Academies is doing and seems to be getting some pickup is ongoing conversation. They do it with, it's called Climate Conversations, actually. They do it through Zoom, just like you're doing here with the European Academy, and they have monthly conversations about different topics that are interesting to different people. And now they're getting more than 1,000 to come each time they do them, 1,000, 1,500, which is terrific. You raised the challenge of, and so it's a large challenge you've raised, but you raised the challenge of social media. And here I want to mention something that a tactic that I really admired taken by the United Nations. They did this during the pandemic, and it's called Verify. Sorry, it's a bit early here. Sometimes I'm not remembering. It's called Verify. And it was architected by a woman named Melissa Fleming, who happens to be, she's a global head of communication there based in New York, and happens to be an alum of my college. And the idea, if you're unfamiliar with it, which is something that I've always thought different scientific institutions could harness, is they asked volunteers, would you like to, on social media, whatever platform you're on, share to your communities as a trusted person to your communities authoritative information which we will provide to you. And then they made messages. This happened to be during the COVID pandemic, but it could apply to anything else. They made messages about, about vaccines and about other elements of keeping yourself safe, which were shared and had an impact, a measurable impact on the misinformation and understanding of the communities during the time I think it was a couple of years that that program ran. Unfortunately, as soon as it stopped, the misinformation flooded in again because that's a base level of that just keeps going. But what was really promising to me was that institutions like yours could, develop content, could solicit like-minded people for starters, who themselves each touch a network of people, some of whom will be, science lovers, some of them may be skeptics, some of them may be other. And I thought that was a really effective way to address the social media challenges.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's a rich question. I really appreciate it.
It's time we can take a couple of more questions, Professor Drust or Professor Pierre. Whoever. Yeah, Professor Surya. Soraya. You are muted.
Thank you for your very nice talk. I'm not a scientist. I'm a historian of science. So, for me, it's interesting to see how science communication changes and so on. But I still wanted to see, it seemed to me that you were talking about maybe, so one seemed like, scientists talking, doing their science and wanting to communicate it, right? But then it seemed to move beyond science communication, actually, and maybe a different model for doing science, which is, starting with the communities and their questions and taking up that into the lab and, with your background and so on. And so that seems to be moving beyond communication. It's actually a different model for doing science, which I should say, many universities are taking up, right? That engagement with the communities is really what they want to do, and embracing the problems of the cities in which they are, is it from heat to water to transport to education, and, or health issues, and starting there and then going back to the lab. So were you talking about these two things, or did I misunderstand you? Or is there maybe just, it's not two things, but maybe there's a continuum?
Yeah, thank you, Soraya, if I may say that, and please feel free to call me Mariette. Yes, I was talking about both of those things, but they're part of a portfolio of response to the problem of science communication. One is, if you communicate well, you're not necessarily going to get the message across. You have to be somebody that people trust to provide the message, which is why it's often a good idea to provide your particular motivations. When people are deciding whether or not to listen to you and to trust you, one of the things they're looking for is, do they think they know what you're trying to share, and whether you have good intentions. We make these judgments all day long with everybody we see. Is this person telling me the truth or not the truth? And the fact is, many people have not met a working scientist, have not had the experience of a life of inquiry, where you ask so many questions and you're going to fail a lot of times before you get the results. A lot of people don't live in that open world. Instead, where they're living is, I've got to get dinner on the table. My children are at school, and I'm trying to manage all of that, and they have very little time to focus on it. So what I was trying to suggest in a portfolio of responses is that one of the ways to get their attention is to talk about the things they care about, insofar as that benefits the science. I'm not sure that the Large Hadron Collider or something like that is going to be a matter of people's everyday concerns, but people also, and studies have shown this, really respond to the science that brings them those feelings of awe and wonder and joy that a lot of us get from basic discovery. When I was at Scientific American, I knew that if we put something about the origins of the universe or human evolution or the workings of the mind, these things that were at the same time familiar, we think we know, everybody's got a brain, but we don't understand, and mysterious, that brought a lot of people attention. But civic science, yes, it is a slightly different way of, not slightly, I shouldn't say slightly, it is a different way of approaching. Here, the idea behind it is that we all have a right to shape and benefit from science, And so how can we have the most inclusive conversations that we can have? And I say that, Soraya, knowing that you're never going to, people are always a spectrum. There was a study by Yale University years ago, Catherine probably knows about it, called the Six Americas, because there are people who really believe in climate change, and there are people who are not engaged at all, and there are people who are skeptics, and there's a whole spectrum. So that's also always true with communication. So a portfolio response to a portfolio of challenges is one way to think about it. I appreciate your question. Thank you.
Thank you. We can move to the next question, Professor Perry Monstein.
Yes, thank you very much, Mariette, for your very interesting talk. Just a short point on democracy and science. We've had interesting examples in Europe lately about politicians taking decisions in terms of the energy sources under the pressure of some political movements, and doing that in principle to follow what they think the people were wanting. So the first question is whether politicians should be leading or following what people think. Second, it was interesting that under the pressure of some groups, for example, nuclear energy sources were closed down in France. A couple of years later, with the Ukraine crisis, people realized that was a major mistake. And some countries had to reopen coal mines, which are terribly polluting.
Yeah.
And suddenly, the same groups that pushed against the nuclear became much less vocal, realizing perhaps, but not confessing their major mistake. So the problem is really, what is the weight of science in a democracy, and whether politicians should always follow what they think represent the majority. Maybe this majority is just the most vocal part of the population.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful question. So I would say to you that I am certainly no expert in politicians or political science, but I think we probably all together here are rational as we can be. Humans, we all have emotions, but we try to decide on the facts. And my own hope for the world is that whether you're a politician or a community member or anybody else, that you would seek the facts and make your decision based on those facts. The truth is, a lot of us make decisions based on, who's the loudest, or who we find we admire, maybe, or feel we is in our favor, trying to benefit us. But what my hope for any politician, and actually maybe it's something useful to consider for the European Academy, thinking about your mission, is that they would use facts, and that maybe if scientists, so one community is the public we're talking about, but another community is the politicians themselves, or the judiciary branch, or legislators. They need advice from scientists, and perhaps there's an opportunity there to support the politicians to make the choices based on evidence. There's a long history of science engaging with policy and trying to be supportive, and I suggest that would be a good thing to think about, if there are new ways to potentially do that. And then you ask about the pressure of groups. One other thing I just wanted to mention is that context is so important from where anybody sits. So very interesting to hear, we want to shut the nuclear plants down because nuclear energy leaves waste, but now we need to start it, and we're in such a hurry, we had to turn to coal, which is terribly polluting, and I'm sure nobody thought that was a great idea, but they felt stuck with it. As a dean myself, I find that when I'm trying to communicate to the community, one of the things that really helps is how I frame the issues in the first place. So I think a lot about how we start the conversation, because once you've started a conversation down a particular path, it's really hard for people to turn and think about an issue in a new way. That's just how we are. We have our cognitive anchors, we have our cognitive biases, you know, and that makes it a challenge too. But I love your questions. You're all so thoughtful.
Okay.
Okay, so if we have, okay, Professor Catherine.
I'm just enticed to give a comment to Pierre's question, which I think very inspiring. But observation is in, you know, being involved since a while through academies and so on, also to talk with political groups is, first of all, not many people with a science background actually find themselves in politics, but that's different in different countries, but typically you are from different, you know, backgrounds. And the other thing is that in multi-party governments, be it on the communal level or be it on the federal or the state level and so on, there is obviously pressure between the decision-making bodies to, you know, cater to their clientele. And so it gets increasingly difficult talking with people who don't have the right background, I would say, you know, to understand a question in 2 minutes. And the other thing is that they are torn between, you know, their different interest groups also. So thank you.
I appreciate this comment. If I could just add, and I, again, really appreciate very thoughtful comments. I know science communication isn't easy. It has to happen at multiple levels. It has to happen across multiple platforms. One thing I hope everybody would consider is through habit, we often think of science communication last. After we've accomplished something and we want to share it, or we want to see it used in policy, or and I think we need to find out ways to integrate and embrace notions of connection, building trust through the entire enterprise. And, you know, not to say that, not to say that everybody should do the same thing, because we can't. You know, not everybody is suited, not everybody wants to. It does, and as you, I hope my examples have shown you, it does take a lot of time. And by the way, the civicsciencefellows.org website has 36 other examples, so you can learn more about different kinds of approaches. But what I'm hoping is we consider the portfolio, that we try to integrate where possible, and that we be aware that science communication and engagement is more effective done from the beginning of anything than it is at the very end. I hope that makes some sense.
So thank you. Just for your information, Professor Katrina is also our group of the Science Communication in the Academy. So if you want to really start something, you can send the link of the Civic Fellow. We can pursue it, or Sarah can host it on our webpage. So we will give it.
Oh, delightful. And also, I hope everybody here knows, and I hope you saw my my email, that you will please contact me anytime if I can be of help. I get no greater pleasure than when I can be collaborating with wonderful colleagues.
So thank you. If there is no further questions, I can see no. So I think we come to end. This is our ritual, almost 1 hour, 2 to 3. And once again, I'd like to thank you very much for accepting our invitation, Professor Di Cristina. It was a real pleasure to see you again, though virtually.
To see you.
Yeah, and it was a very meaningful for us. And Sarah will edit it, and it will be podcasted on YouTube for there. So thank you very much, Sarah. If you want to say something.
Just thank you, of course, to Professor Di Cristina and to all our members present for this delightful webinar. So thank you all.
So
thank you.
Thank you all, and have a very good summer.
Good afternoon, and have a good summer.
Bye.